two chapters, chapters 38 and 39, giving a highly relevant to our present situation explanation of the war of Gog and Magog. I discussed this last night with some of you. And then we come in chapter 40 of the book of Ezekiel. From chapter 40 to 48 is all Ezekiel's prophecy of the future order. In chapter 40, Ezekiel tells us that he was in Babylon. Ezekiel actually left Jerusalem before the destruction of the temples, many years before this destruction, and he was prophesying in Babylon what was going on in Jerusalem. And already as the temple was being destroyed, Ezekiel is taken by an angel who brings him to the heavenly Jerusalem, and this angel has a rod and a cord. There's a measuring rod and a linen measuring cord, and there is what we might call this virtual temple, or perhaps it's the real temple, the prophetic temple. And the angel takes Ezekiel on a tour, a virtual trip around every gateway, every courtyard, every hall, every section of this temple, telling him this gateway is so many cubits high and so many cubits wide. This wall has to be 5 cubits thick. That wall has to be 6 cubits thick. This hall has to be 20 cubits. That one has to be 60 cubits long. A very difficult part of our Tanakh, with many difficult expressions, even for linguists in the Hebrew, and quite difficult to get any picture of what is this building that Ezekiel is describing. Most students of the Tanakh probably at this point simply either gloze over or go on to the next section. But after this section of the temple building, Ezekiel prophesies about the future Kohanim. There's a section of Ezekiel which we read in the Haftarah as a Parashas Emor. And finally Ezekiel comes to the final settlement of the land of Israel, describing how at the end of days the 12 tribes of Israel will be settled on Rutzuot, strips of land, one below the other, the 12 tribes starting in the very north. I don't know how many of you know that the northern boundary of Eretz Yisrael, according to the Torah, is in a place called Antiochus. Antiochus is in way north of Syria into Turkey. It is a good part of present-day Turkey will be included in the final Eretz Yisrael, and this helps to explain why the nations are in so much consternation about the idea that this would one day happen. But you can see in maps of the Tanakh the proper representation of the 12 tribes, 6 to the north of the temple, 6 to the south of the temple, and a whole section of land in the middle of Eretz Yisrael, corresponding to present-day Jerusalem, that will be the compound of the temple, the compound of the priests, and the compound of the Levites. So, and then we have the closing prophecy of Ezekiel about the stream of water flowing from the temple and stretching out and coming to sweeten the eastern sea and the western sea, the Yam HaMelach, the salty sea, and the Mediterranean, and the spread of the waters of divinity over the whole world. Very, very spectacular chapters. The Romchal's book is specifically focused on the form of the temple itself. And besides the book I'm going to be speaking about, the Mishkanei Elyon, Romchal also wrote what is known as the Chamesh Parakim, the 5 chapters, which corresponds exactly to Maseches Midos in the Shas, in the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. One of the 63 tractates of the Mishnah is called Midos, and Maseches Midos, from the expression midah, a measurement, gives us the precise measurements of the second temple. We have in our Mishnayos a complete Masechta that is a perfect record of exactly how the second temple was designed. And if you ever look in any books about the temple, or if you look in Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, which also gives the form of the second temple, it all derives from Masechet Midot. So Ramchal, before we even come to the Mishkanei Elyon, which discusses the significance of this building, The first thing that this genius does is to determine exactly how the building is going to be. It's one thing for Ezekiel to have this very opaque prophecy of the form of the temple. It's almost incomprehensible. There's very extensive commentaries by the Gaon of Vilna, by the Metzudas David, by the Radak, and all the other main, the Tosfos Yom Tov. They all have explanations of the form of the temple as they get it out of the Mikra, out of the Tanakh. But Romchal, in his 5 chapters, provides us with a perfectly lucid, clear explanation of how the Temple Mount and the temple courtyards and the temple buildings will actually be arranged. And let me just say at the outset now a word about how this will be. For those of you who are familiar with the Temple Mount and the Second Temple, of those of you who studied Rambam's Hilchos Beit HaBechira, which actually explains the form of the Second Temple, you know that you go up on the Temple Mount from the eastern gate, which we can see the ascent of the Temple Mount. If we're standing on the Mount of Olives looking over the Temple Mount, you'd ascend there and you'd come through onto the Temple Mount itself, and the Temple Mount is 500 cubits by 500 cubits. Well, now cubit is the distance from the tip of my middle finger until my elbow. Let's call it maybe 18 inches, thereabouts. We normally estimate that each cubit is about half a meter, and that means that the 500 cubits is 250 meters. That's really not very large, and Romchal tells us the future temple will be 3,000 cubits, a considerably larger enclave than the first and second temples. And you go up into the temple in the time of the first or second temple. You'd go up through a series of courtyards. After you come inside the Temple Mount and climb up some stairs, you're going to go into a courtyard which is called the Ezrat Nashim, the courtyard of the women, which is actually an exterior courtyard. And then you would have to enter the Azara, which is the inner courtyard, in which the temple itself actually stands. In front of the temple, in the very middle of the Azara, is the huge Mizbeach outside, dominating your view as you go in, and behind the Mizbeach you see the temple building rising up ahead of you, very tall building, squat. The form of the temple building was compared to that of a lion, and the temple is called Ariel. Well, now the Mizbeach, the altar, has to be in exactly the same spot. Rambam in Hilchos Beit HaBechira tells us that the Makom HaMizbeach Mechuvan Bioter, the place of the altar of the animal sacrifices outside the temple, was aligned exactly where Adam made his sacrifice, exactly where Noah sacrificed when he came out of the ark, exactly where Avram brought Yitzchok for the Akedah, exactly where Vayetza Yitzchok Latzuach Basodeh, where Yitzchok used to go out to meditate in the field, exactly where Jacob laid down his head to sleep at the time of the Mikdash. The Makom HaMizbeach we find in the end of the book of Samuel, how David actually located the place of the Mizbeach. We should not for a moment imagine that it's simply arbitrary, that our people has been thinking about this place for thousands of years. It's very, very strictly determined position of where exactly it has to be. And the Mizbeach was standing to the east of the Even Shesiyah. The Even Shesiyah, translated as the stone of the foundation, is considered to be the very center of